Good evening, everyone. I'm going to have your attention just a couple of minutes. We're very happy to welcome you all. Last week, we had no idea we would have such a nice turnout. So we're delighted that you're here. This, I believe, is our second Tapestry Tuesday. This is the first one with a large crowd, as far as I know. So we're figuring out things as we go along. This is usually the third Tuesday of every month. We'll be in here. And tonight, we welcome Rebecca Rule. That reminds me of a story. Words we probably all said it one together. Becky collects and shares stories of New Englanders, mostly about New Hampshire. And she's the author of a dozen books. She has a number of them here, if you would like to get some.
I'll have my picture on them.
And your latest is, according to her, is That Reminds Me of a Funny Story. And are we going to hear some of those tonight?
Yes.
Good. All right. For 10 years, she hosted the New Hampshire Authors Series on New Hampshire Public Broadcasting. And as far as I understand, currently you're doing Our Hometowns.
Our Hometown. Yep.
Good. And we'd like to thank the New Hampshire Humanities Council and its support through Humanities to Go for the generous support for this program tonight. And there's an evaluation form on your tables. If you could fill that out. I have extra pens and pencils up here if you don't have some. We can get those out later on. We'd also like to thank the New London Inn for hosting us here tonight. We're very appreciative that they give us this opportunity to have this. And I see some of who already are partaking of the inn's hospitality. Mary Carol said, you're welcome to stay right where you are afterwards if you'd like to have dinner here. Okay? And we're very pleased to have you do this. And our support of the inn can help the inn support the Center for the Arts, and that's a win-win for New London and the whole Sunapee region. So we're very grateful to the inn for accommodating us and having all this work out. So if you can show your appreciation to the inn, we would appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I will turn it over to you.
Oh, can you hear me in the back? That's what the moderator said at town meeting, and the fellow said no. The moderator said, count your blessings. I hope I'm not too rusty. I don't know if you heard about this COVID thing, but it kind of put a damper on live storytelling. So I haven't been telling as often, and if I make a mistake, I'll just start over. Tell it again. That's the thing with stories, you can do it. It's not like blowing glass. One of the lessons I've learned during this COVID situation is that stories are alive. They might go dormant for a while, but the minute you start to tell them again, they come back to life. The Akan people of the Sahara, when people gather to hear stories, the teller always says, did they not say this? And the listeners say, did they not say that? And that's the story tradition. Stories evolve, stories change. And at the end of a session for the Akan people, the teller says, I put this on your head to carry. And tonight I'm going to put some stories on your heads to carry. I'm going to offer them to you for you to pass on to other people. I had an email yesterday from a lady over in Westmoreland. Is that how you say it? Westmoreland? Westmoreland. And she said her husband was running for selectman. Did I have any good selectman stories? I said, yes, I do. I put it on your head to carry. So there's going to be some selectman stories told over in Westmoreland to help that fella get elected selectman. I'm going to start. Stories are how we connect with each other, and they're how we connect through time. I'm going to tell stories for about 45 minutes tonight, And then I'm going to get a sign from Tom. And then you can tell me some stories or ask questions or make comments, whatever you like. But this story goes back to 1894. Well, it was published in a book that came out in 1894. And the book was a collection of old New England folk tales. So think how far back the story goes. But guess what? Human nature doesn't change. We're the same now as we were 200 or 300 years ago. Tom and I were just talking about that. We learn our history so we repeat it. Because human nature doesn't change. And this is a story of that character in New England folklore called the Yankee Trader. So this farmer was out in his field plowing in the spring of the year with his big bay horse. And he got the field about halfway plowed, and wouldn't you know it, that horse dropped. You know what a horse is?
Yeah.
Good, you're with me. Yeah. Sometimes I go to faraway places like Connecticut, and they don't know what I know I'm among my people. He was plowing his field with his big bay horse in the spring of the year, and wouldn't you know that horse dropped dead in the furrow. Something he had never done before. And would never do again. But that farmer was a Yankee trader, and he had an idea. He rode his other horse 5 miles up the road to his neighbor's house, and he said, Charlie, you know that big bay horse I got down to my place? Charlie says, I know that horse. That is a fine workhorse. Well, the farmer says, how would you trade your white horse for my bay? And Charlie thought about it for a bit, and he said, you know what, I would trade even. And they shook on it. And you know what that means? It's a deal. Well, the farmer says, Charlie, hate to tell you, my big bay horse lies dead in the furrow. Charlie says, my horse died 5 weeks ago. And its skin is hanging in the barn. And that's the story of a Yankee trader from 200, 300, who knows how many hundred years ago. I'm going to tell you now a story for the season. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's winter. But it's kind of a weird winter, isn't it? I don't really quite know what to make of it. There's snow, then there's no snow, then there's ice. Anyway, well, this is a story of winter. It was told to me, well, I'm going to say 20 years ago. A woman named Heather Pike sent me, anybody know Heather Pike? I didn't think so. A woman named Heather Pike sent me an audio tape. Do you remember audio tapes? An audio tape of her grandfather, Warren Angus Wilbur. And on that audio tape, Warren Angus Wilbur was telling stories, about an hour's worth of stories of his life in Seabrook, New Hampshire. And you could tell they were in a kitchen. You could hear the rattle of the silverware, and you could hear the clink of the glasses, and you could hear every once in a while somebody say, Grandpa, remember the one about, or Warren, tell about the time. And he would tell the story. So I listened to that tape, and I picked out a couple stories that I liked a lot. And I've been telling them ever since. So I'll tell you this story from Warren Angus Wilbur. The recording was made in, can I remember? I'm going to say 1984, when he was in his 90s. So these stories go back a ways, but I'll give you an example of his sense of humor. He was a Yankee through and through. He had that dry Yankee sense of humor. He said, yeah, I was walking down the street in Seabrook, and I saw my friend Alan. And I said, Alan, how are you doing? He said, good. Pretty good story so far. So I said, Alan, how's your wife? And Alan said, I don't know. And Warren Angus Wilbur said, what do you mean you don't know? And Alan said, well, she's down to Boston visiting her sister. Oh, well, how long has she been in Boston visiting her sister? About 1.5 years. Your wife has been in Boston visiting her sister for 1.5 years. Yeah, last time I seen her, she said when it was time for her to come home, come and get her. That sound familiar? And I love that expression. I use it a lot. She's in Boston visiting her sister. Where is she? She's down to Boston visiting her sister. It covers a lot of country. But the story I want to tell you is about Warren Angus Wilbur and his best friend, Reza True. They love nothing more than in the middle of the winter, like now, in the middle of the winter, to drive to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. They would drive to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, and they had a little camp up there. Hello, they had a little camp up there, and they would stay in the camp for a couple weeks, and they would go ice fishing. Because, you know, any of you like to go ice fishing? Yes, Judy does. It's fun, isn't it? It's fun, isn't it? Did you like to go ice fishing? Well, this is a story for the other Judith. I'll tell you the story about my father. Okay. Judith knew my grandfather, who was from Danbury, New Hampshire. His name was Trapper Bill. They called him Trapper Bill. But my father and my grandfather out fishing on the school pond. Yeah, and they had a hole. They had a hole in the ice, because that's how you ice fish. And down come the preacher. The preacher had a little house right. You remember that? The preacher had a little house right there on school pond. He's looking down in the hole, and he said, "Well, that's interesting." He was looking at all the equipment and so forth. He says, "Well, what's that for?" And there was a gallon jug of muscatel. And my father said, "Well, you pour that in the hole to keep it from freezing." That's a true story. That is a true Danbury story. Where was I? Oh, they love to go to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire to go ice fishing. They went out one day in their old Vita truck, and they were driving around, and they saw a pond. This is Warren Angus Wilbur and Reza True, where they had never fished before, and it looked perfect for pickerel. Not too big and not too deep, because pickerel like it where the weeds go up through. They don't like it real big and deep, like Joaquina. They like that one. So they took out their equipment from the back of the truck, and they did not have a fancy auger. No, they had a chisel and an axe, and they went out on that little pond, and they commenced to make a hole for ice fishing. Unbeknownst to them, this pond had a history. Several years earlier, it's all history, isn't it? Several years earlier, a logging crew had come through this little valley and clear cut it. Now they came through in the middle of a snowy winter, not like this one, the middle of a snowy winter, when the snow was about 4.5 feet deep. Now, if you're clear cutting, if you're logging, and the snow is 4.5 feet deep, do you dig to the base of the tree? No. No. You cut it where it lies. You cut it where it lies. So in the spring, when the snow melted, you had a valley full of 4.5-foot stumps, which was okay because the beaver dammed up the brook that ran through the little valley, and the water rose and it covered all those stumps and made this little pond, little habitat. Well, that was fine. But the other thing that had happened was earlier this year, when Warren Angus Wilbur and Reza True went up, the beaver had moved out. They moved out after the ice had frozen. So when the beaver moved out, the dam broke. And when the dam broke, the water ran away to the sea. The pond disappeared. So what you had was 1.5 foot of ice sitting on these 4.5 foot stumps. Now, Warren Angus Wilbur and Razor True put a lot of work into making a hole through that 1.5 foot of ice, and when they looked down, there was no water. This was a great disappointment to them. However, and this is looking on the bright side, Razor and Warren Angus Wilbur looked down the pond, and there was a couple of other fellas also making a hole for ice fishing. And that's when Razor had an idea. He slid down through the hole. He crawled the length of the pond, and when those other fellas finished making their hole through the ice, up he popped. They said, "What are you doing down there?" Razor said, "Well, I drowned it last fall, and this is the first chance I've had to get out." But the best part of that story is on that audio tape. A little voice says, "Grandpa, is that a true story?" And Warren Angus Wilbur says, "Yeah, well, most of it." And what interests me about this story in terms of the storytelling tradition is, and this has reaffirmed for me that every time you tell a story, it changes. Can you, is this true? This
Yes.
is true. And a story is never the same twice, ever. So I went back at one point to re-listen to that tape, and that story has changed. It has changed in the 20 years I've been telling it. And I didn't change it on purpose. I thought I was telling it exactly as I heard it. You know, in Warren's version, the beaver didn't make a dam. The loggers made a dam. It was a logging dam. But in my head, I'm much more familiar with beaver than loggers. And when I picture it, and storytelling is all about picturing it, I picture those little beavers out there making a dam. Those are the dams that I know. So over time, the story has evolved. The essence is the same. That little voice still pops up at the end. And Warren and Razor still go to Pittsburgh, and they still go out on a pond. There's no mention of pickerel, but I'm very interested in pickerel. So the pickerel appear. But that's how stories evolve, and it's how you make a story your own. Which is why somebody says, "Well, I don't want to tell your story." It's not my story. It's never my story. I'm just the conduit. I'm the conduit. And when you take these stories and pass them on, they become your stories. It just occurred to me to tell a story while we're in the North Country. It's one of my favorites. It's short. You know, there's long stories, there's short stories. Doesn't matter. Short stories sometimes are the best of all. The story is about two fellas, or about a guy, one fella. And he's driving through the town of Colebrook, New Hampshire. You know Colebrook, New Hampshire? Yeah. And he's exceeding the speed limit. He has exceeded the speed limit. So the cop pulls him over. License and registration. Fella's fumbling around, looking for his paperwork, you know how you do, or maybe you don't. I don't know. The cop says, "Where are you from anyway?" And the fella says, "Pittsburgh." And the cop says, "Well, now I know you're a damn liar." He says, "You got Pennsylvania plates." You cannot fool us. We're on top of this. This story is a community story. And I came up with that term because it was so clear to me. I was in Potter Place, New Hampshire, which is not that far from here. Right.
10 minutes away.
Yeah, I just heard what they were talking about it on Chronicle the other night. Like, oh yeah, had a place in New Hampshire. This was quite a long time ago. And I was telling stories. I invited stories from the audience, and a woman stood up and told a story. And as she told the story, I looked around the room and I realized everybody already knew it. You know how you can tell they were not home? You can just tell from the faces, from the body language. People already knew this story. Well, the story, Gracia Snyder told the story. Anybody remember Gracia? And it was a story about Woofy George. Now, Woofy George had been dead many years when I heard the story, and he had lived a long life. But the story went back to when he was 3 years old. It was a community story. Everybody in that community knew this story. And it was passed on to me. I pass it on to you. Now, we're all part of many communities. You know, if you're a teacher, you've got a teacher community. Your church is a community. The Arts Center is a community. Certainly New London is a community. And your family, of course, is your first community, whether you like it or not. It's your community. And each community has its stories that are passed within the community. You know, it's like, here, you welcome to the community. Let me tell you about so-and-so. So this is the story about Woofy George, a community story. When Woofy George was, I've got a title for it. It's called Woofy George's First Words. When Woofy George was 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, he never spoke. He never uttered a syllable. People thought, gosh, maybe there's something wrong with young Woof. But other people said, no. He's got 4 older brothers and sisters. They talk all the time. He doesn't need to say anything. He was the littlest Yankee. Speak only when you need to speak. Well, one day, Woofy was home alone with his mother, and mother was making a pot of beans in the big old Glenwood stove. Remember the big Glenwood stoves, big, massive cast iron cook stoves. And she had put some newspaper and some sticks into the little firebox to get it started, some kindling, got that crackling away, and she went out to the wood pile and got a chunk of wood, or as they say in Berlin, New Hampshire, a junk of wood. And she took that junk of wood and she went to put it into the little firebox, and you know, it was a dike too big. Didn't fit. Just that, you know, one of those little knots. Didn't fit. However, on those Glenwood stoves, you can take the lids off the top and you can access the firebox from above. Gives you more space. So she took that junk of wood, she shoved it in from above, it went in about halfway and stuck. Yeah. It's tragic, isn't it? A New Hampshire tragedy. She couldn't pull it out, she couldn't push it in, and that's when the smoke began to fill the room, and that's when the flames began to lick, and that's when little Woofy George, 3 years old, said his first words. He said, "Don't go, Ma, too goddamn big." Sweet little story. But imagine, people remember that all of Woofy's life, and there's a kind of immortality of being part of a community story. Now, because I'm in New London, I was thinking about my New London stories. Are you all from New London?
No.
One person from New London. You've been to New London. Where are you from?
Grantham?
Oh,
Danbury.
Danbury.
Hopkinton.
Hopkinton.
Salisbury?
What? Salisbury? Hopkinton. Far away. Yeah, those foreign parts. Well, I've got a Grantham story. Anyway, tell that later. But but I was thinking I have a lot of New London stories, I've done quite a few programs in New London, but people always tell me stories about Ira Littlefield. Does anybody know Ira Littlefield? I never met him, but people, and I think that all the stories really aren't about him. I think they just get attributed to him.
He was the brother of Anna Littlefield, who was a physician.
Yes. You see, there's truth to this. This is true. So I don't know how much of these are true, and sometimes I tell them, and they say, "Well, that don't sound like Ira." I don't know if it's Ira or not, but I'm going to tell you a couple of Ira. These characters become larger than life. They really do. Stories about oh God, I'm losing it. Who's the guy, the governor with the Icunico, Sherman Adams? Sorry. There's so many stories about Sherman Adams. They can't all be true, but he's a larger than life figure, and so they get attributed. So the Ira Littlefield, I'll just tell you a couple of Ira Littlefield stories. One is that at town meeting, I love a town meeting story. At town meeting, somebody was upset because that person new to town had done some digging and discovered that there was no information about where the water and sewer lines were. Do you have town sewer?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, fancy. Yeah. Not fancy. But you know, that's pretty fancy for, if you're in Salisbury, you're impressed by that. Wow. But he said, there's no, I've done the research and there's no maps, there's no nothing. And somebody said, well, that's all right, because Ira knows where all the pipes are. And the fellow says, well, Lord, what if Ira moves away? Or what if, you know, God forbid Ira should die? It happened to be Ira was there. And Ira stood up and he said, well, what if you should move away? And what if you should die? And Ira Littlefield said, well, then it won't be my problem. Does that sound right?
Yep.
The other story I heard was that, and it could be any town, but it's been attributed to Ira. It could be any town, but he worked some for the town. He was employed part-time for the town, some. And he was in town hall, and he was on the phone, and this was in the days when you would dial the phone and you would get the operator, and then the operator would connect you to your party. So Ira was talking to the operator, who was giving him a hard time or something, I don't know, and he finally said to the operator, well, why don't you just go to hell, and hung up. Well, the selectman was right behind him, said, Ira, you cannot be talking on a town phone in the town hall telling people to go to hell. Now you call up and you apologize, Ira. So he called back up. Hello, is this the operator I was just talking to? Yes. One I just told to go to hell? Yes. Well, you don't have to. Now, this one, I'm just going to read to you. I'm not going to try to tell because I don't tell it. I haven't learned to tell it yet, but it's short and it has Anna in it. So that'll be interesting. So the story it's from Dan Allen. Is Dan here? You know Dan?
I do know.
He told me this story some time ago. And he told about old Dr. Clough and young Dr. Clough. Remember the doctor's Clough? And I've heard some stories from the brother who was there was another brother who was not a doctor. But Dan said that Ira Littlefield always saw old Dr. Clough. That was his doctor. But there came a time when old Dr. Clough had to retire. I can't see my patients anymore, he told Ira. You'll have to see my boy. So Ira went to see young Dr. Clough, who gave Ira a thorough exam and prescribed belladonna for his ailments. I don't know what those ailments were, but he prescribed belladonna. Well, Ira went home and looked the medicine up in the medical books left by Dr. Anna Littlefield. See, a ring of truth. He called old Dr. Clough up. He said, your boy prescribed me belladonna, and I just read in this book that that's for pregnant women. He said, you and I both know I ain't pregnant. And old Dr. Clough says, how many's he got you on? Ira says, I'm on 5 a day. And old Dr. Clough says, he's got me on 8. So those are my Ira, some of my many Ira Littlefield stories. But he's a larger than life character. You know, I think he was a character in real life, and then there are so many stories about him, which have evolved over time, which have changed. This story I collected. I'm just checking the time because I went. Oh, good. I collected in Laconia, New Hampshire. I was at the Friendship Club. And one of the ladies said, you need to talk to Ginger Ryan. She's got a lot of stories. So I went over and I said, Ginger, I heard you got some stories. No, she said, no. Well, she said, I grew up in Lakeport. And she said, I went to a 1-room school. She said, this was in the days when there was just one teacher for all the grades. And she said, you know, every morning, this was before World War II, we were very health conscious. And every morning, that teacher would line us up from the littlest to the tallest student, and she would give us each a tablespoon of cod liver oil. She said, of course, we had just the one spoon. And then she said, and being just the one teacher, once or twice a day, she would need to leave us to go outside and use the outhouse. And she would say to us, now, children, I'm going to leave you for a very short time, but while I am gone, I expect you to behave. In fact, I'm going to keep my eye on you. She would take out her glass eye and put it on the desk. And Ginger Ryan said, to this day, I believe she could see us. And I told that story at the Geneva Point Farm. And a woman said, and this, I love how stories are like little webs. They connect us in different ways. This little silk thread went out and caught her, and she said, I wish my brother were here to hear you tell that story about the teacher with the glass eye. She said he went to that school, and he always told us about her, and we never believed it. So there you have it. There you have it. This story I tell for lots of reasons, but mostly I tell it because it shows my diversity. It's a Maine story. And a Hawaiian story. Yeah, it has a Hawaiian title. You know, Hawaiian words have a lot of vowels in them. So the Hawaiian title to this is, and you'll know what it means by the end of the story, the Hawaiian title is Foa Dala Lua. Isn't that beautiful and musical? Can you say that? Foa Dala Lua. Oh, it's just like a song, isn't it? So John Rule and I, he's sitting out in the other room. He couldn't get a seat, but it's all right. Hi, John. Yeah. John Rule and I have camped up on Donnell Pond in Franklin, Maine, which is up near Ellsworth. And one summer we were up there, and my friend Ada across the pond called me up, and she said, Becky, did you hear what happened to Pudgy and Joe on Tuesday? I said, no. Tell me, Ada. She said, well, that was the morning. It was awful foggy. Remember that? I said, yes, I do. It was awful foggy. She said, yeah, well, they went out salmon fishing like they do every morning. And she said it was so foggy you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And there they were out in the broads of Donnell Pond. Donnell Pond is a big body of water In Maine, they call ponds lakes and lakes ponds to fool the tourists. It's a big body of water. And she said they were out there in Pudgy's little aluminum boat with the putt-putt motor trolling for salmon. And Pudgy was using his usual bait that he enjoys, which is the moose look wobbler. You're familiar with the moose look wobbler. He likes the gold one. It's a spoon with a treble hook. But Joe was trying something new. He was trying out a Honolulu spinner, hence the Hawaiian connection. So they're trolling like the Donnell Pond, in the thick fog. When they hear nobody else on the pond at all, just that little cut. The lines are out behind the boat, and along they go, put. And they hear a kind of a whooshing sound right overhead, a kind of a whoosh. And out of that fog comes a huge bird with a white head, white tail, black body, black wings, wingspan about 7.5 feet. It was, you know what it was? Yes, it was an American bald eagle, our national bird. This is a very savvy group. Not everybody knows this. One lady said, was it a seagull? Somebody thought it might be a condor. Yeah. Shepherd, what's a shepherd? Blue heron, no. But, good guess. My one lady said, was it a mosquito? It was excellent. But my favorite, and this is why I love to tell this story, I was at the Harvey Lake Women's Club in Northwood, where I live, and I said, it was, and my friend Jean Lane said, was it a penguin? And her friend Joanne said, Jean, penguins don't fly. And Jean said, well, she said it was coming down. And that's all you need to know about Jean Lane and Joanne Bailey. That they were Northwood characters. But in fact, it was an American bald eagle, our national bird. And that bird flew so close to the boat that the tip of its great wing almost brushed Pudgy's Red Sox cap. And it swooped down behind the moving boat, and with its great talons, it reached into the water and grabbed hold of Pudgy's moose look wobbler, flew off with it and snapped the line. Disappeared in the fog. Pudgy shut the motor right down, and there they sat, Joe and Pudge, in the middle of Donnell Pond in silence, the fog closing in, and Joe says, Pudgy, all our years on Donnell Pond, I have never seen an eagle come so quiet, almost brushed your cap with its wing, and how it swooped down, grabbed a hold of your moose look wobbler, flew off with it. Snap the line. Want that something, Pudge? And Pudgy said, yeah, that was something all right. That was a $4 lure. I don't think I've changed that story a bit since Abe told it to me, except I added this Honolulu spinner. But when she ever said $4 lure, I laughed and she said, Becky, it's not funny. It was a $4 lure. It is one of those people who is hilarious, but has no idea that she's hilarious. She makes me smile. This story, I'm telling you, we're sort of winding down. Let me see, check the time. Oh, goodness. I'm going to tell, yes. Oh, he's giving me the sign. All right, I'm committing to 2 more stories, and then we'll have questions and you can tell stories. I want to tell this story because it shows how stories evolve and how, the truth of a story is in the essence of it and not so much in the details, if you know what I mean. This is a story that I heard from Ollie Fifield over in Canterbury, New Hampshire. I'll never forget it. I was there telling all town meeting stories. I have a program I do that's all town meeting stories. And I said, who's got a Canterbury town meeting story? And Ollie Fifield, sitting in the front row, said, well, town meeting in 1957 was pretty good. I said, Ollie, what happened at the Canterbury town meeting in 1957? He said that was the year there was a petitioned warrant article to ban nuclear weapons in Canterbury. Yeah, and it got in the paper, and it went all over the AP, all over the country. People from California were calling town hall to find out about this petition warrant article. It went international. Jack Hand sent a contingent of media to cover the Canterbury town meeting of 1957. What Ollie didn't mention was he was moderator at the time. I found that out later. He was too modest to say so. But he said, so they showed up, the Japanese people showed up a day early. We had them over to supper. So we had baked beans and brown bread. You know, those Japanese people had never had bread out of a can before. It was a cultural exchange. Next day we get to town meeting. We have to go through all the regular articles and get to the petitioned article. And finally we get to the article to ban nuclear weapons in Canterbury. And he said, at that point, Ollie stopped telling a story. And he turned to the back of the room and he said, Huey, what did you do at that meeting in 1957? Huey said, well, I don't remember. Ollie said, Huey is Ollie's brother. Ollie said, I think you do remember. And Huey said, well, I might have proposed an amendment. He said, I believe what I said was, I don't like nuclear weapons any better than anybody else, but there's one thing I hate more than nuclear weapons. And that is black flies. So I would like to propose an amendment to ban nuclear weapons and black flies in Canterbury, New Hampshire. And it passed. And that's why, to this day, in Canterbury, New Hampshire, there are no nuclear weapons or black flies. That's a true story. Now, I was telling this story this summer at Shaker Village. There was a big event at Shaker Village. And so I was telling this story, and a guy comes up to me, and his name is Mark Stevens, and he's from Canterbury. He said, that story you just told, you got it wrong. And I said, thanks, that's always good to know. But what he wrote to me later, and he said, I said, Ollie told me 1957, but I've had people look it up in the town report and there's no evidence of it. He says, that's right. That's because it happened in 1982. And he wrote to me and he said, Ollie was moderator right after World War II. Then he got married and he stopped being moderator, raised a family. And then later he became moderator again. And in his older years, he would get the two, call them the two things blended together. He said his first tour of duty. He said he would get his tours of duty mixed up. And that's why he says 1957. But he said, but that's okay because 1957 sounds better. And then he said, he said, in fact, it was Stuart, the other brother, who made the amendment. But people kept saying it was Huey, so after a while, Huey started saying it was him too. So it's no wonder I get confused with these stories. But the essence of the story is what matters. The essence is what matters. That's where the truth is. And I'll end with this story, just a little bitty story, but to me it speaks to all that we've been going through the last couple of years. It's philosophical. Think about it. You're going to be thinking about it all the way home, maybe. The story goes like this. Father and son went fishing on the river one morning really, really early. And it was a sunny day, a bright sunny morning. And they sat on the bank and they tossed their lines into the water. And the sun sort of shone onto that little boy. he got sleepy, got up so early, you know, he got sleepy and he fell asleep, fishing on the bank of the river. Slept for quite a while, and when he woke up, the fog had rolled in. He looked around, he was confused, he said, "Daddy, we ain't here no more." And his father said, "Don't worry, son, we ain't far from here." So I will end there and see if anybody has any questions, comments, or stories to tell. Yes.
I just wanted to mention, I don't have any story to tell, but I have been sharing one of yours, your grand story about Mr. Holmes and the snow.
Joey Holmes, Joey and Alfred Holmes. Yeah, I almost told him that, but I ran out of time. But it's a wonderful. I'll do the short version, or you can do it. You do it.
No, please.
Okay, short version is Grantham, New Hampshire. Joey Holmes and Al told me this story about her husband Alfred Holmes, who was a road agent for many, many years. And we know Grantham, New Hampshire. Yeah, that's right. It's a very small state. Is anybody here from out of state? What? Are you understanding everything?
I am.
Oh, good. All right. And so town meeting, Paula New in town, who lived there 10, 15 years, got up and he was complaining about taxes and how certain department heads exceeded their allotted monies on their line. And he wanted to know why Mr. Alfred Holmes had exceeded his allotted money on the line for road agent the previous fiscal year. Demanded an explanation. Alfred was way in the back of the hall. He came walking up the center aisle to the microphone. He adjusted his overalls and cleared his throat, and he leaned in. The fellow said, "Mr. Holmes, why did you exceed your allotted amount of money in the previous fiscal year?" And Mr. Alfred Holmes said, "It snowed." Something like that. I got a longer version. But that's the gist of it. And that is a true story. People remember what happens at town meeting. Yes.
I was born in Grantham, and Joy's my cousin.
Joey's your cousin. How's she doing?
I have not seen her for quite a while. Like the last time I saw her was in Springfield at one of your presentations.
I love it when Joey bounces in, sits in the front row. Yeah.
So this is a real short one. So
Okay.
a guy pulls up in front of this old country store, and the guy's in the rocking chair,
Yeah.
and the dog beside him, and the guy's a little nervous in the car because he's afraid of dogs. And
Yeah.
puts the window down. He says, "Hey, mister, does your dog bite?" He says, "No." The guy gets out of the car, starts to go in the store, and the dog bites him. He says, "I thought you said the dog doesn't bite." He says, "That's not my dog."
Yes. That's what we call a classic. That's a Yankee classic. It belongs in the canon of Yankee classic stories. That's an excellent story. Anybody else have a question or a story? Yeah.
I have a question. The town next to us, Newberry, there's the famous I Love You Chicken Farm.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering if you'd ever written about it or if you consider it a Yankee story.
It is a Yankee story, and it's about a rural family.
Really?
Yeah, and guess what? I am a rural, but no relation.
Someone wrote it to you?
No, no. Though some people think that, but it was a family of rules, and Louis and oh gosh, what was his wife's name? Louis Rule and his wife used to come to my programs all the time in Concord. They were at Havenwood, and it had to do with their family. Their daughter had chickens, and somebody was in love with her, and wrote that.
And I think also the additional Yankee part is the part, this, I don't know if it's true, that the Department of State, the transportation, would keep painting over it. And
Well,
the townspeople took over and kept painting back.
they painted over it at least once,
Yeah.
and it reappeared.
Yeah.
Chicken Farmer, I still love you. Yeah, and that's in a book. Dan Sesney has written a book, 25 Rocks That Rock. Of course, it's a natural New Hampshire, only 25, but 25 rocks in New Hampshire that you should go and visit, because that's how we do. And that's in it, the Chicken Farmer Rock. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. Tom.
My grandfather's from Long Island, North Shore. Back in the day, that might as well have been New England. But he was a farmer, and he trucked into Brooklyn to sell his produce. And he got in there one day and he got lost. He couldn't figure out how to get back to the road he was going to get back to Rocky Point. And so finally he saw a fire hydrant and pulled up, parked by it. And pretty soon a cop comes up and tells him, "You can't park there." And he said, "Well, I know that, and you know that, and I needed to find you, and I thought this was the best way I could." And I looked at him and says, "Follow me, I'll get you out."
Oh, that is so good. Where did you say he was that he got lost?
Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah. Brooklyn. That's excellent. I'm using that one. Anybody else have a story? Yes.
I have a story, Becky. You've heard it before.
Go ahead, but it's a good one.
Okay.
And it's a good one.
Yes, I am also a transplanted New Yorker. And for 12 years, I drove back and forth from New York up to here. And while I was still working down there, and I would come through Newport, New Hampshire, and I would come through on a Thursday night about 11:15 at night, and I wanted to get home to New London by the 11 o'clock news. So I was hoofing it through New Hampshire, Newport.
That's not a good
And
one.
one Thursday night, the cop stops me. And you know what they always say. So, where are you going so fast, or why are you going so fast, right?
Yeah.
Right? And I said to him, I said, can you, and I looked at him and I said, oh, darn.
No, you know what you said to him? You said, he
I
said
said-
to you,
he
I'll
said-
be the cop. I said, "Ma'am, you know why I pulled you over?"
Because you're lonely. He laughed, and I knew I wasn't getting the ticket. And I didn't. Well, 1 week later, I'm hoofing it through Newport, and cop stops me. I look in the mirror and said, "Oh, thank you, God, it's a different." He says the same thing.
"Ma'am, you know why I pulled you over?"
And I said, because you're lonely. And again, he laughed. I didn't have a ticket. And the third week in a row, I'm crawling through New Hampshire. Cop turns me and he says, "You know why I pulled you over?" It's the first cop. And I thought, oh, buggers. And I looked at him, I said, "Yep." I said, "My light's out. It just went out in the first light." And he said, "You look very familiar." No, just coming through New Hampshire. But
Well
it was,
done.
and still didn't get a ticket.
Well done. That was a great example of how this happens to me too. You get the whole thing set up and then you screw it up. My story about nuclear weapons in Canterbury. One time I was kind of tired and I said, "You know what I hate more than black flies?" Oh God. That's completely screwed up the whole story. But what can you do? You press on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna end with a little story. You told the classic, the dog story. Ate my dog. The Yankee classic. This story is from Sunapee, and it's not in the canon, but it will be if I keep telling it, and if you pass it on. I put it on your head to carry. Told me by Skip, who said a couple of old timers down in Sunapee, and they like to pal around, and they would drive. They were Walter and Al, and Walter and Al loved to pal around in Walter's old truck, or Al's old truck. So they were driving through downtown Sunapee towards dusk, maybe exceeding the speed limit a little bit. Al's driving, and Al sees something out of the corner of his eye, and he says, "Walter, was that a cop we just passed?" And Walter says, "Yeah." And they kept going. Al says, "Walter, did that cop pull out on the road when we passed him?" Walter says, "Yeah." Keep going. Al says, "Walter, is that cop following us?" Walter said, "Yeah." Yep.